All right. Recording in progress.
Woo.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our community series where we talk to really smart people ops, HR, talent acquisition folks about the work that they do and how they're leveraging HR technology. I'm here today with Jen Paxton, who's the head of people at Smile. She's been at a number of different venture-backed companies. And we're going to focus our conversation today specifically on employee experience technology, talk about some of the tech that she's leveraged in the past, why she's done it, how she's got internal buy-in, how rolled these things out, made them successful, specific tools, all that good stuff. Jen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Phil. Excited to chat today with everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I know there are a couple people tuning in live. If you have questions, please let us know. Just kind of pop them in there. And if you're watching this after we've recorded it, you want to join a future one, just tune into our newsletter, our community, to be aware of future events. And we've got several coming up. So Jen, do you mind giving us a 2-second background on yourself, your experience in sort of this people ops world?
Yeah. Did not start off in the people ops world, actually. I actually have a master's in opera, but then made the switch into recruiting via an agency, and then went into to corporate or to to startup, really. And so I've been in scaling startups for the last 10-ish years at this point. Mostly in smaller teams, so small, scrappy, but mighty teams. And mostly it's in kind of that smaller kind of like my smallest company, I guess I've been at is 20 people, and the largest I think has been at like 300. So kind of that's my sweet spot at this point. And then the current company I'm at, Smile, is 63 people, but the kicker for us is that we're in 19 countries. So we're fully remote and fully distributed, which is complexity in itself and a challenge in itself. So that is me.
Yeah, that sounds like us. We're, I think, like 12 people in we're in 5 continents. So it's like one of our colleagues said, like, the sun never sets on SSR, which I think is kind of like a funny, throwback to the British
Yeah.
Empire. But very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you mind giving us like an overview of kind of like your people tech stack, generally speaking, like everything from like recruiting through payroll type of thing?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of the recruiting side and then go through the HR side too, the payroll side. So on the recruiting side with employee engagement or with candidate engagement, we're using a platform called Jamyr. Selfishly, I'm a co-founder of Jamyr, so we are dog fooding that as well. In addition to that, we of course post lots on LinkedIn, and then when we are actually getting the candidates in a platform, our applicant tracking system is Lever that we use. And then after that, we get them into our HRIS. We use a platform called Collage. It actually is a Canadian-based platform. Smile, my company, is actually was based in Canada before moving completely global. So I went with a Canadian-based HRIS, and then because we are global, we actually have 2 different kind of payroll and benefits forms. So for our Canadian staff, we have Ceridian and Xero for our payroll side. And then actually for everyone else that is not Canadian, so myself included, we're on a platform called Deal, which basically allows companies to hire people as either employee of record or contractors, kind of gives a little bit of flexibility, and has entities in all over the world. And then in employee engagement side of it, we are using Office Vibe. And then I would actually say for us, Slack is also a high tool for employee engagement as well. We have a Smile Values channel that I would think of as kind of the engagement side as well. So those are kind of our tech stack right now. And then predominantly we're using Zoom, but also sometimes Google Hangouts too.
That's awesome. And anything that you foresee in the next year to 18 months, we're going to be 60 and we're going to be, X in 18 months. And therefore we're looking at blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would like to explore, but I'm not sure yet, just from a timing perspective, and also the level of kind of education and adoption that's going to take, would be a performance management system. So we currently are doing our performance reviews twice a year, but we're doing them via Google Docs. not the most efficient way to do things. So I wouldn't mind potentially leveraging 15.5, which I have, bought and used in the past, or potentially Lattice as well. It's probably for me between one of those two what I'd have us go with at this point too.
Nice. And are you guys using anything to manage one-on-ones? Any other sort of aspects of like employee experience?
Yes, yeah. So we actually use a platform called Fellow to keep our employee agendas for one-on-ones. It's been extremely helpful, but for me, I was like, it's an afterthought for an employee engagement tool. But you're right, Phil. It could be seen as an engagement and just keeping everything all in place.
Nice. And does Collage offer, I'm actually not super familiar with the platform. Like, do they offer any sort of like employee experience stuff, or is it mostly a system of record?
Yeah, it's mostly a system of record. They're a smaller company. They actually do have a performance management offering as well, but it is not customizable. It's like 4 questions that are just, hey, what is this employee's performance? It's very, very basic, but it basically just kind of houses all of our data at this point.
Okay, gotcha. And are you guys doing anything on like the rewards and recognition side of things?
So we don't have any tools for rewards and recognition, but we do have specific anniversary and surprise and delights that we'll manually do for our teams over here. One of the perks or things that we have over here that we offer all of our employees is this e-commerce credit. Smile is a points and loyalty platform for e-commerce stores. And so we have over 100,000 merchants. And so we actually give a monthly stipend for employees, $100 USD every month to use at a store. And we'll actually do a surprise and delight and be like double points sometimes as well. So I think that sometimes actually helps us with engagement. But it's definitely a manual process, checking it on the back end and making sure people get in the receipts.
Yeah. How do you think about, so obviously and we're just sort of now like diving into like employee experience and employee experience technology. How do you think about when you might want to leverage one of these recognition solutions? Because you're kind of doing like, you've got the Slack channel where people are like calling each other out and be like, hey, like you did this and it aligns with our values. And then you've got sort of the rewards aspect of things, and you're doing anniversaries and whatnot. When, from your perspective, do you think you guys might look to systematize that more and buying like, one of these peer-to-peer recognition platforms?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at the beginning of the year in January, I was thinking that it might be a good time for us to think about it and to actually like adopt a tool like this. And then when I was talking with our CEO and our CFO, thinking about kind of what our plan is for the rest of the year and what might happen to kind of our startup as we are growing. And there was a lot of movement going on this year. We weren't quite sure if we wanted to, number one, invest in a new tool right away, knowing that things can definitely happen within the ecosystem. In addition to that, the one thing I keep coming back to is how much time am I going to need to devote? Because there's going to be tons of time needed to devote to get that adoption. And when I thought about kind of all the high profile things, like all the priority things that needed to get done, it just kind of kept getting like just lower and lower and lower on the list.
Yeah.
And I think that is so challenging because it's something I would love to automate. It's just that balance kind of that fires over here that you got to get to versus like getting to have things.
Yeah. And I think that's really smart because when you buy one of these tools and you don't have the necessary time, it's not going to be successful, right? Like it's just, you can't do everything. You got to focus on 2 or 3 things, keep the main thing and get it done. And then maybe, next quarter, next year, you can get to these other aspects of things. What have you found to be the sort of some of the most effective levers in building culture and engagement in a remote team that's 60 some odd people spread across 19 countries? Obviously there's not a lot of people that live in the same place. Maybe there's a few in Canada that do, but otherwise I'm sure most of the people don't have a strong like physical connection with each other.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say people don't have a strong physical connection with each other, but we are finding more ways to get emotional connections with each other. And so we've really focused on the events that we're planning. Are they actually getting people to, number one, work in teams? That's really important. So we have a few, we've been working on this platform called Luna Park. And it basically will pair people actually, like 3 or 4 people together, and then you'll work to answer, different trivia things, or there's usually like a game that people will play on with their keyboard as you would with a team. And so I found that leveraging a platform like that has helped not only to bond our team more and have just spending time together, which is so very crucial, but also the team bonding of like the camaraderie that you build being on that team. And then also just it's a platform where you can kind of trash talk people and kind of banter back and forth, which also I think builds that trust and builds that community with people as well.
What was it called? Luna Park?
Yeah, it's called Luna Park.
Luna Park. All right. Well, we've got to check that out too. That sounds really interesting. And these events are all virtual, I take it.
Yeah, so yeah, they're all virtual, and then actually Luna Park does an additional kind of pairing every single month, and so you get paired at random. Oh, actually, I have another tool that I need to tell you about that we use. Actually, I just thought about it. They pair you at random with another person on like in your company, and you play this mini game with them, and then your scores get put up on a leaderboard. And again, like that camaraderie, and you're getting partnered with somebody that most likely you probably don't talk to every single day. This is kind of like Donut, which we also use. And I completely forgot about mentioning Donut here. Because we were using Donut basically weekly to sync up 2 or 3 people within the team to get together and have these like virtual coffee chats. We've actually moved it to be a less frequent. People were kind of starting to think about, hey, this is too much for me to do, and so we're giving a little bit more flexibility to that end as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of. I mean, I think a lot of people join remote international teams because they like async work. They're like, I just want to like do my job, get it done. But also like we're all human beings, right? Like we're all like social, some more than others. And so having this camaraderie is important for our, us as individuals, but also I think as a team, it's really nice to be on the same page, share values, get to know each other.
Yeah.
So
I'd also say it because members of, I mean, almost all of our leadership team joins these meetings as well. It humanizes the leader, like the leadership team, which is so important, especially in a remote environment, because especially kind of with Smile, we hired basically like we doubled our team and staff last year. And so all of these people are coming into the culture, and they may have preconceived things about what other kind of cultural baggage they had from another company coming in, and like, hey, we don't know how processes are going to go. And so if you can actually get them more exposure to members of the leadership team and see them as humans, see them as people instead of just these, figureheads or, people on a screen, that's been really great from an engagement and also a trust perspective as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. You mentioned earlier something that I thought was really interesting, where you were having this conversation with the CEO, CFO, and is that like an annual planning thing? Is that something you try to do on a regular basis? And how does that factor into the things that you're trying to plan out from your people ops strategy?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so usually in the fall is when we will plan what our 2020, our 2023 plan we are planning now in this fall. And so typically I'm putting together a wish list of everything. Like if I could have everything in the world, how much would that cost, right? And I'm thinking about, all of our team offsites, a company-wide offsite that we can do, because virtual is great, but also getting some in-person time with your team is awesome too. What are the platforms that I want to use? Any other tools I want to use? Any other perks I want to add in? So I'm at that point where I'm putting in this laundry list of wishes that I want. And I'm going to my CFO and saying, which ones can I have at this point? Or like, what does our budget look like? And what he's doing is he's actually taking kind of the forecasting from like what will be next year and mirroring it together so that we can have we use the rule of 40 here. So it's kind of been one of those things that we try and stick to as far as like what we're making versus what we're burning. And so if he's putting it in and saying, okay, like you can have this, but you probably can't have that, or hey, you can have this amount of money, how do you want to spend it? Then I get to know what it is. We did a very similar process for our basically like our promotions. I wanted to make sure that I had a pool of money at the beginning of the year to be able to work with managers and to get those promotions and kind of get everything in place there too. So it's worked out well. The only thing I will say is when there's something that is not in budget, which does definitely happen, then I'm having to have kind of more of these one-off conversations. Typically what I have been doing is talking with the entire leadership team. There's only 5 of us, so it's not a large group of stakeholders, but talking with the entire leadership team, kind of pitching it and educating them on the thing I want to do and why it would be beneficial for the company, maybe why it'd be beneficial for me, and all of those things. We discuss it as a leadership team, and I would say, 9 times out of 10 after we've discussed it as a leadership team and it's been, okayed by finance, like we're good to move forward on it too. I mean, we've done that with a few management training courses, and we've done it with just a few other little things too.
Nice. And are these pitches like, is it the end of a meeting? You're like, hey gang, like, do you have 5 minutes? Like, can I tell you about like, or are you like putting together a PowerPoint presentation, an Excel model? Like, can you give a little bit more understanding and also maybe like some things that you found that work particularly well?
Yeah. So usually it is the first thing that happens in the meeting. So since we use Fellow for our agendas, I'm usually like the one that pops it up into the first part of the meeting so that we can talk about it and actually have enough time to educate, potentially debate as well. And then it really depends on the ask. So for the management training course that we did, it's smaller amount of money. And so a lot of it was more, hey, we have, these managers over here. A lot of them are first-time managers, and basically going through the needs of why, like what kind of need this would actually help to fill at this point. And I usually will write it all down in Fellow, like bullet pointed style for this. I haven't had to put a PowerPoint presentation together specifically for an ask, but I have done a few presentations to the entire company for things that are bigger, like our compensation philosophy and talking about the decision-making process for that, all the things that factor into it, the phases that we want to take to get to, where we are with that too.
And are there any like aspects of these pitches that you think really resonate with the powers that be, maybe the CFO? It sounds like that's the person in your org that's in charge of budget. Like, are there any like key things you're like, you got to have X when you're pitching this person?
Yeah. Well, I do think that one thing that I like to have, and it's not just for the company, but also for myself as well, is how is this going to actually impact the business? How is this going to positively impact the business? If we don't do this, what is going to happen? This happens a lot with our hiring as well. If we don't hire this person or make budget for this person, what is it going to affect for everybody else? A lot of my kind of things that it comes back to though are, hey, this is going to affect our retention rate. And it's like, hey, like employees are happy, but I think they would be happier if they got X, Y, and Z, and they'd probably stay with us longer. I have pulled a lot of just data on like what was our retention rate when I first joined, what is our retention rate now, and what's the tenure look like? Because if people are staying longer at a company, usually that's a good indicator of them being happy and hopefully engaged as well.
Yeah, it's actually also a really strong correlator. I'm not sure if that's a word, but with the success of a business. If you look at like the most successful, growth stage companies or whatever, there's this really cool tool called LinkedIn Insights that I got access to for a few years. And like, the engineering team stays around longer, the sales team stays around longer because everybody's like, oh my gosh, like I'm having an impact. And I'm part of something kind of cool as well. So that's awesome. And it sounds like you do a pretty good job as well as sort of evangelizing like success. And maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like, from like this management training thing, like you probably had some data about like, here's how many people took it, here's how many lessons they did, and here were the results. Do you ever kind of like brag, I guess, internally about like the success that you've had in the people ops team?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. We probably don't do it as much as we should, to be honest. There are things that we will brag about. So like we have our pulse survey that we use through Office 5. If it goes up at all, or if the participation rate goes up, that's definitely something that we will brag about and say like, hey, this is really great. It's better because it's an opposite of like an ask of like, hey, our participation rate is down. Can you help us get it up there? Like it's highlighting that, and I will do that. But no, I probably should actually do that more. I'm not as good at like internally bragging about like, hey, our like tenure number went up by 0.2 of a point at this juncture. Yay! Like I will tell the board that, but I won't just tell the entire company that, which maybe I should. So yeah.
Yeah, it's I've noticed that a few folks do that fairly effectively. I mean, obviously you don't want to be obnoxious about it, but it gives you some internal juice, right? And like it's almost like a social proofing thing. It's like, hey, this thing that we did worked, and so the next thing that we do, you should like put your efforts into as well, because you'll be part of it. But anyway, do you mind talking more about like how you guys are leveraging Office 5 and why you picked that tool specifically?
Yeah. So, funny enough, I actually inherited Office 5, but I had actually I'd used it at a previous company, so it wasn't from a kind of learning curve. It wasn't a hard learning curve to get back into. And so what we do is we send weekly pulse surveys out to the entire company, and that's great because basically every single week I have a pulse on like who's happy, who's maybe not happy, who's just like meh. And that's great for me to see. In addition to that, every employee has the option of putting in either anonymous or non-anonymous feedback. And I go in usually it's every Friday morning. I go in and I look at all the feedback and I write everybody back. This is a very tedious process, but I do feel like it builds trust with employees because they're not just putting their feedback into a black hole. I actually do write them back. And then if for some reason I feel like I'm not the right person to write them back, I will, pull in somebody else either from the leadership team, or their managers also get a view into this as well. So their managers could answer it as well. And then also if there is like praise in there, which will be anonymous praise, I just love this part. Then I will, if I can ask them, I'll be like, hey, is it okay if I share this with your manager? Just let me know who it is and I'll share it with them. And then I am able to take a screenshot of it and upload it to Slack to their manager, which makes them feel all, warm and fuzzy too, which who wouldn't love that? And then they actually have a new feature called Good Vibes, which is like, it's like our Smile Values Slack channel where people get to do shout outs, but they have particular, templated cards that you can put at the end. So every week with that pulse survey, at the very end of the pulse survey, they say, hey, do you want to make somebody's day? And then you flip open a card and you're like, oh, whose brain do you want to duplicate? Who is a really great leader, or who do you feel supported by? Like you can put something in there, and that's been really great to see. And we're trying to make that more public. So every single week we're trying to be like, hey, look what happened in Office 5 this week too. So maybe that's the braggy part that I should be talking about with you. Like,
yeah. Just put together a slide of all the awesome things. I mean, you're obviously in a smaller org, and you're touching so many different people every single week, which in a very positive way of like, hey, I'm listening to you, or hey, you're doing a great job or whatever. So I feel like that's getting a lot of the good vibes coming towards you and your team. So that's pretty cool. Do you have a sense for like what percentage of employees will do the survey each week?
Our highest level of engagement has been 84%. Our lowest has been, I think, 68%, in fact.
Oh.
So it is anything above 60 is usually like I'm unhappy and like, yes, this is great. But when we got up to that 84 in June, I was just like, okay, like maybe we can keep it this way. And I was very worried when we actually got it up to that 84% that like our happiness or our engagement score was going to go down. And it actually didn't go down that much, which made me even happier because that meant that more people were actually providing their feedback and they were actually they were happy to provide that feedback and happy. So.
Yeah. Is it fairly different, or is it like a group of like 10% of people like are just never going to do this?
So I do think that it depends on the person. So we do have some employees that they think that a week is too frequent, and so they won't put theirs in every single week. They're an every other week person, and that's totally fine. I mean, I do kind of factor that in a little bit and do kind of a monthly average when I'm looking at some of the analytics. But there are also going to be probably a handful of people that never put it in. I'll be honest. There's probably at least one or two people on our leadership team that never put in their feedback because they're like, well, it's just going to you, Jen. I could just tell you what was wrong, like if there was something wrong. And so like, I almost feel like, why are you even in this platform? And like, you're counting against my participation rate here, but
right.
Whole other deal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
I think they're special, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and how are you guys using? I'm kind of curious about the performance aspect of things. It sounds like you're basically doing like Google Forms and Google Sheets.
Yeah.
On a did you say quarterly or biannual?
It's biannual. Yeah. So we're actually this is a horribly manual process. So I will tell you about it, but then I'll be like, ugh, to myself. So I create a Google Doc for every single person.
Oh my God.
Every single person.
Wow.
I know. It was better when we were like 50 people. Like it was and it was okay. But I created one for every single person, and then I share it with that individual. And then I, of course, keep like a spreadsheet of every single link. And then I share a manager one separately with every single person. And I would love to get this process automated at this point. Like I'm like pretty close to wanting to have it be automated. Again, the problem is that because we do them twice a year, it's like, do I just potentially put it off so that I can teach everybody a tool? Or do I just kind of keep suffering in silence on this end? And I think I might be a masochist a little bit and just like, I just don't want to teach people how to do a tool yet, but maybe that'll be like next year. So that actually should be something I like do Jan 1. And then like I have a whole 6 months where people can get the tool, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any like tricks for these employee experience tools? Like usually you need the buy-in of everybody in your company really to make them successful. Like if people aren't using Office Vibe or Donut or Luna Park, like it just like doesn't really work. Like how do you evangelize, get people excited about it? Do you leverage like internal nodes, or what's sort of your strategy there?
Yeah. So I go back to thinking about when I got 15.5 at Privy. So 15.5, performance management, and also pulse surveys as well. And so when I was looking at 15.5 and with Lattice, I actually pulled basically one person, like one Sprocket person from each department to test it out. And I had a beta test group. So we were all testing it, like both of the platforms. We met twice to go over kind of what are people's pros and cons. How did they like being onboarded to the program? What did they like specifically about it? What did they find really challenging? Like what just didn't go with their brain well? And then at the very end, the other thing that it came down to, honestly, was there were like a handful of people that had already used 15.5 that had were very, very familiar with it and were already internal evangelists for the platform. And so we went with 15.5. Like it was almost like I personally think Lattice would have been better because it was more customizable for us, but the adoption won out. And I think that was, it's, again, they're very, very similar tools in a lot of instances. So it worked fine for us, but there's definitely like a mental balance you have to pull on that, and of what you think is probably going to be best, but also what people are going to use.
And how did you get those like one person per function to kind of do this extra work?
Yeah. I mean, it's bad to say that I just asked, but I did. I actually just asked them like, hey, I guess my ask was very compelling, but I said, I want to develop this new tool for our team. It's going to help us do X, Y, and Z. I would like to have this be more of a, group decision than just a Jen decision. I would like you to, give me that feedback. And I don't think I got turned down. Like I don't remember getting anybody saying no, they wouldn't help me, which is nice. I mean, I also think that maybe it's just human nature, but when you ask a favor of people are pretty inclined to say like, yeah, I'll help you out. Why not? Especially if you talk about like why it's going to be beneficial for them in the end, like you give to get kind of thing.
Did you have a particularly close relationship with any of these people, or just like?
I'm going to say probably all, pretty much all of them. Like, I think I met with them, almost all of them, like at least once a month, or we'd go get coffee or lunch, and or we'd have like a meeting. So yeah, it wasn't very challenging to get them to do it, I guess.
Nice. And then in terms of like the actual rollout, like, did you have them communicate it or reinforce, or like, how did you get everybody on the team excited, the rest of the company?
Yeah. So we started with actually talking about the cohort, the people that did the beta test, and why they liked the tool. We kind of stuck away from anything they didn't like about the tool, because that would just be a detractor. And so we talked about why they liked the tool, the pros and the cons, before we really stood out to every single person. And then because I had meetings with other people that were in there, I was like, hey, like, can you pitch this? Like, can you buff it up a little bit and make people excited about it? And then after about 2 weeks of having the tool, I did a check-in with people. I was like, hey, have you used the tool yet? Or like, if I had seen like 2 or 3 people that haven't used the tool, I was like, hey, like, haven't seen you use the tool. Like, what's your hesitation here? Again, like, privy was relatively small. I think it was like 70-ish people when we did this. So like, it was relatively manageable to meet with more people and to have those DMs go out.
Okay, so you communicated the pros through DMs to each individual person.
No. Sorry. So I did we have it all like an all hands, and so I communicated it at an all hands in probably like PowerPoint form, most likely. And then if anybody wasn't actually using the tool, that's when I would do some DMs and kind of get more information, gather why maybe they weren't using it.
Okay, gotcha. Nice. Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like it helps when it's not just like coming down from on high, right? Like, it's like, here's the process behind it. Here's how we involved everybody, including people that and work with, and blah, blah, blah. And it sounds like it was a successful rollout as well.
Yeah, definitely a successful rollout. I think the only thing that eventually came back from the feedback was that people wanted to do more things with it. And they wanted to customize it more. And I was like, oh no, we went with a tool that was really good out of the box that we couldn't customize because you liked it. Right. And of course, it's like the opposite of what we would have had with Lattice. We would have had to do a lot of building, but we would have had a lot more customization. So yeah, that was really like one of those kind of things. Like, myself and my people ops manager, Rachel, were just like, we told you, it's fun.
Yeah. It's also one of those things where like, people are like, well, wouldn't it be great if you could do X, Y, Z? But it's like, do you really want it to do that? And like, would you really use it? Or like, do you just want the simple thing? Cause like, yeah. Anyways.
And to your point, like, most people are going to go with the simple thing. Yeah. There's so many bells and whistles. Like, the more complex it gets, the more people eventually like back away when they're really in the product. So,
yeah. 1000%. So it sounds like you're looking at a performance management system now. Maybe Jan 1 is like a good time to do this after the next cycle. How do you build a list of tools to look at? Like, how many tools do you think you will look at? I know you've already mentioned 15.5 and Lattice are sort of the front runners, and maybe you're just going to look at them. But I'm curious how you kind of think about like creating that short list.
Yeah, it's funny because marketing actually does work on me. Like, I sign up, like, whenever there's a really cool white paper, or like maybe some like LinkedIn post comes up and they're like, oh, check this really cool thing out. Like, I'm like, oh, let me download that white paper. Like, I'm that person. And then I'll be on their email list, and then I start to see, oh, these are really cool things. And so I'll get exposure to more platforms that way. And then honestly, like I will go to my HR community and be like, cool, like what platform do you like? Who do you like? There was actually one of the ways that I found this compensation tool, Pave. I don't use it yet, but it just acquired Option Impact, which is a free compensation tool that we had been using. But I had found out about it through my HR breakfast that I host, and so it was just one of those things where it was like great word of mouth, and when people actually like a tool, they tell people about it.
Yeah, I can attest it is a cool tool. I did a demo about a year ago of it. Okay, got it. So it's a lot of network. Like you've sort of built, you've got your own Slack community. You do this HR breakfast. Like over the last 10 years, you have a trusted group of people who are just like, look, looking at performance management. What do you guys think? Who should I look at?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually it was even when I was looking at Lattice and 15.5 years ago, I was even kind of told like, hey, like this one does this and this one does that before I even went and tried them out. And so that could be great. That could also be that I had bias going into it as well. And that's also, I think, why you need a group, like a group of beta testers, so that you're not experiencing your own bias and making that kind of top-down decision. But yeah, I really do lean on just other people in my network to help me kind of understand what have they used and what has worked for them, and also what hasn't. I feel like there's also just so much truth in if somebody's had a bad experience. I try and take it with a grain of salt, but it's also very easy to believe people if they've had a bad experience with something too.
Yeah, it's hard obviously to parse like one-off experiences, but it's a data point, especially if it comes from somebody that you know and trust, and there's no incentive for them to tell you that they had a terrible experience. That's what happened, and so you have to figure out, was that idiosyncratic? Is it going to impact the way that I might leverage this tool as well?
Yeah. Well, and I think about like the implementation process as well. When you're on a sales call, you're like the salesperson is going to tell you, oh, implementation takes, a week or, 24 hours, blah, blah. And then you talk to one of your peers that has used the tool and like, oh yeah, it could have taken a week if you didn't need to do this or that or this. And then it's like, you really start to build up, okay, what is a realistic implementation going to look like for this product? And then I feel a lot better, because at least I'm going in with my eyes wide open and not just like thinking that it's going to be magical, and my expectations are a little bit more level set too.
Yeah. And sometimes you just know the right questions to ask, right? Like you've heard really specific things and it's like, I wouldn't have thought about that. But now that I've heard from your experience, it's super useful. Do you ever use websites like G2 or Capterra to read reviews?
Sometimes, yes, I will. I had a lot more in the past when I didn't have as big of a network and I didn't feel as comfortable asking like random people like, hey, what do you think about this thing? I did it a lot. Yeah, I did a lot when I was in my beginning of the career, mostly G2, but I had heard of Capterra, and I probably looked at one or two reviews there too.
Do you think there's any good way to get pricing insights into like, maybe what sort of price you could get for some of these tools?
Yeah, I haven't found one yet, besides just asking people. And I also find it challenging because sometimes even like people that I have really strong relationships with, like there's always a weird, like, why do you want to know the money amount? And I'm like, I just want to know like if it's even in my, like in a budget, or like if it's like $5,000 or $10,000, like that changes my approach on how I'm going to go to like my CFO potentially too. So I definitely think it'd be nicer to have it publicly be posted, because people do talk. It's just maybe not as prevalent. And not every company is posting their pricing. I actually was talking with Keith at VentureFizz, and he publicly posts his pricing, which makes it like a no-brainer. You're like, oh, great, okay, I know exactly how much it's going to be, and I don't have to worry about any of those things. Then I wish more companies did that, but I also know why they don't, because potentially every company size is going to be just a little different. You don't want to price yourself out of somebody who might be your ideal customer profile. Like, it's always a tough end to go through. But
yeah,
Yeah.
It is. It is. I mean, I guess the good thing is, if the pricing's not posted, you have a better chance of negotiating. And even if it is, I've seen I've seen some negotiations where I'm like, I didn't even know you could get a discount off of that,
Yeah.
$1,000 a year tool. But
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and it's funny because like, yeah, if you offer to do like a case study or offer to write a blog post, like you get, more discounts come, and like you can have a better negotiation that way. I feel like I've been equipped to do more of that negotiation, but if I hadn't had exposure to it or just didn't feel as comfortable doing it, I feel like I would maybe be taken advantage of in that kind of sense though too.
yeah, for sure. It's like walking in a car dealership. Um, what I love that you like get other people involved in the decision making, and are very thoughtful about like getting buy-in from the budgeting aspect of things. What other sort of like criteria or processes do you use to figure out like this is the tool that we actually want to buy?
Yeah. Well, I wish that I could say I do this process every time, but I'm building this habit now. But instead of even thinking about like the specific tool, I'm thinking about what my need is first, because I'd like to be able to like understand all of my needs and then find a tool or tools that fit those needs.
Mhm.
That's not always the case. Like I was even talking with our IT manager today because he's potentially thinking about switching us from Zoom, which we use predominantly, to just to Google Hangouts, like to Google Meets. And when I was thinking about that, we were talking about, well, what are the pros and cons of actually switching it? So what are the capabilities that this one does versus that one? And then are those capabilities actually, must-have needs, or are those things that are nice to have that, to your point, like no one's going to actually use? So like all of those kind of come in this mental model. And then that goes back to the adoption again. Like I feel like I'm hammering this part home, but it's burned me so many times where it's like you think that you've done amazing work getting this amazing tool, like it's gonna save the world, and then two people use it and you feel like you lost all your money. Like it is not a fun experience. So I feel like I probably lean more on the adoption side than even the functionality side sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's super smart because if it has all the bells and whistles, nobody uses it, there's no value, right?
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, like that's what you're doing. You're solving for a pain point. You're not looking at tools. You're looking at, I need to do X, Y, Z for my organization. Um, are there any people ops teams or companies that you look at and you're like, they do such a phenomenal job of employee experience? And maybe it's through leveraging technology and tools, or maybe it's just like generally you're like, they're killing it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like when I think about the employee experience, I can only assume from what I see and what I hear from others. Because like
Yeah.
I see a lot of great marketing, like in recruitment marketing or employer marketing from like HubSpot, from like Rapid7. I would even say like Help Scout does a great job of like getting their culture out there and what they do and how they treat employees. And then when I think about like how you actually treat employees internally and what are employees saying, I'm thinking about like what companies do I not have applicants from? Like what
Mm.
like have I had any applicants from I'm trying to even think of any great companies here. I'm like blanking on myself. Yeah, have I had any great applicants come from like Datadog? No. I haven't had anybody apply that's from there. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Because then it's like they're not looking, but that's not like an outward marketing thing. That's something that like you get with your like only your internal data. So, and then yeah, going back to like just peers in my network. I mean, how many of my HR peers that are potentially extremely burnt out or are not burnt out and they're still at their companies? Like how many people are actually staying at the companies that they were at 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. I would love if somebody had that data set somehow of like
Right.
what companies are people applying for jobs from,
Mm-hmm.
because and I guess like retention is very closely linked to it, and it's sort of the LinkedIn talent insights thing, which in my opinion is like a fairly useless, like extremely expensive tool, but the one thing it shows you is retention across functions and geographies for a given company, and the best companies always have the highest retentions.
Yeah.
And part of that's because people are getting paid in stock, and they're like, well, I'm at Stripe or Snowflake, and like even if I'm getting screamed at every single day, it's like I'm getting paid, $300,000 extra a year because I'm just like vesting this really awesome stock, and that's part of it. But I think there's cool things that are happening there from a cultural perspective as well. It's not just economic.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's a interesting way to look at it. Anything else? We sort of had this like very wide ranging conversation about all things employee experience / employee experience tech. Anything else that you would like leave our audience with in terms of advice, or maybe it's tools, maybe it's, hey, this is overrated in terms of, you don't need performance management, just use Google Sheets. Trust me, I love aggregating all this data every 2 quarters.
No, I do not. Like, go get a performance management system. Yeah. No, I think one of the biggest things for me, and it comes down to like why I'm still in kind of the role I'm in and why I do what I do, but thinking about listening to employees and really like factoring in kind of their perspective, and not just building out your tech stack for yourself or for your own kind of personal automation, which is great and should definitely be factored in, but thinking about kind of that pain point that is going to be solved within the employee side of it, and how it's going to affect like an IC versus their manager. Sometimes when you're looking at tools, you don't think about that until like it's an afterthought, if a thought at all. And so I think that's always good to explore, at least when you're thinking about the employee experience, because the employee part is the experience, right? So
Yeah, there's these themes of collaboration, empathy, and one other that I've since forgotten, since I thought of this 10 seconds ago, and, like sort of coming through all of your answers. And I think that it is really important. Like you're not just going to buy one of these tools and like fix all your problems, or, whatever. Like you've really got to think about the people using it. Why are you going to get this? How do you get them involved? And that's going to help you make better decisions and make a bigger impact at your company, which you can then brag about and, get budget for whatever crazy idea that you have next. So Jen, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your wisdom. Thanks everybody for listening to us. If you like learning about how to leverage HR technology, please check out our future interviews and our blog posts and tool reviews and all that other good stuff. And until next time, we'll leave it here.